Over 60, top 5 fruits that keep your eyes sharp and clear. Stop right there. If you're over 60, there's a very good chance your eyesight is already slipping, and it's happening faster than you think. Road signs look blurrier, print feels smaller, glare from headlights blinds you at night. And you've probably been told that's just aging, nothing you can do. Well, let me shock you with the truth, that's a lie. Because the decline of your eyesight isn't just about age. It's about oxidative stress, inflammation, and poor circulation, forces that attack your eyes every single day. And here's the part no one talks about. The right foods can fight back. Yes, something as simple as what you eat could mean the difference between losing your independence and reading, driving, and living life with clear, sharp vision well into your 70s, 80s, even 90s. Some doctors will roll their eyes when I say this. Some people will laugh and insist only surgery or prescriptions matter. But I've spent 4 decades in medicine, and I've seen it with my own patients. The right fruits eaten consistently have slowed cataracts, calmed macular degeneration, and in some cases given seniors back their confidence to drive at night. And here's the kicker. The #1 fruit for your eyes is not carrots. It's not even on most people's radar. But in the next few minutes, I'll reveal it, along with 4 other powerful fruits that act like natural medicine for your eyes. But before we jump in, I have one request. If you care about protecting your vision, if you want to see clearly for years to come, then hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring this life-saving information to more people just like you. Now let's begin. Blueberries, oranges, kiwis, grapes, and one shocking, tropical fruit that could change everything. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just save your eyesight. Why vision declines after 60? Before we talk about the fruits that protect your eyes, let's face the problem. Why does vision decline so quickly after 60? It isn't just bad luck or something we have to accept. 3 powerful forces are working against us, and together they explain why so many seniors find their eyesight fading with age. The first is oxidative stress. Your eyes are exposed to light every waking moment, sunlight, fluorescent bulbs, the glow of your television or phone. That constant exposure creates free radicals, unstable molecules that damage the fragile tissues of the retina and macula. Over time, that damage shows up as cataracts or macular degeneration. Researchers writing in investigative ophthalmology and visual science estimate that more than half of all age-related macular degeneration cases can be traced back to oxidative stress. That's enormous. Imagine cutting the risk of blindness in half simply by lowering that burden. The second is chronic inflammation, or what scientists now call inflammaging. It's a low-grade fire that smolders in the body as we grow older. In the eyes, that fire damages blood vessels, speeds up macular degeneration, and worsens diabetic eye disease. I've seen this many times in my own patients. Seniors with arthritis, heart disease, or diabetes often lose vision more quickly because the same inflammation attacking their joints and arteries is also attacking their eyes. One study in the American Journal of Pathology showed that people with the highest levels of inflammation also lost vision the fastest. If you feel your body is always fighting something, joint stiffness, swelling, constant fatigue, your eyes are almost certainly fighting that same hidden battle. The third culprit is poor circulation. Your eyes depend on a constant flow of oxygen and nutrients through capillaries, so small they make a strand of hair look thick. After 60, those vessels stiffen and weaken. High blood pressure, cholesterol, or diabetes make things worse. When circulation falters, the retina doesn't get what it needs, and vision suffers. The CDC reports that 1 in 3 Americans over 65 has some kind of blood vessel disease. If your hands and feet run cold or your ankles swell at night, chances are your eyes are quietly paying the same price. Now, here's the hopeful part. Oxidative stress, inflammation, and circulation decline are not life sentences. They can be slowed, managed, even reversed with the right foods. Antioxidants neutralize free radicals before they cause damage. Anti-inflammatory compounds calm the fires of inflammaging. Nutrients like vitamin C, vitamin A, and bioflavonoids strengthen blood vessels and improve circulation. I've watched patients who feared losing their independence find relief and sharper vision simply by changing what they ate. So here's my question for you. If adding a few simple foods to your diet could protect your eyes for another decade, would you be willing to try? That's what our 5 superstar fruits are all about. And in the next chapters, you'll see how each one can give your vision a fighting chance. Fruit number 5, blueberries, the antioxidant shield. If I had to pick one fruit that acts like a natural shield for your eyes, it would be blueberries. These tiny dark blueberries may look ordinary, but inside they are loaded with anthocyanins, powerful antioxidants that protect your retina from oxidative stress, one of the main drivers of cataracts and macular degeneration. Think of anthocyanins as bodyguards, standing watch over your eye cells and stopping free radicals before they can cause lasting harm. Science backs this up. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry showed that blueberry compounds improved retinal function in animals exposed to bright light damage. And a European study found that people who ate berries at least twice a week had a 38% lower risk of developing age-related macular degeneration compared to those who rarely ate them. That's real-world protection, not just theory. Blueberries support eye health in several ways. They help relax blood vessels, which improves circulation and ensures that oxygen and nutrients reach the retina. They calm inflammation, something Harvard researchers linked to slower progression of eye disease in seniors who consumed more flavonoid-rich foods. And they even appear to improve night vision. Stories from World War II told of British pilots eating blueberry jam before missions to see better in the dark. While modern science debates the extent of this effect, more recent studies confirm that blueberries improve the eye's ability to adapt to low light. I think of Evelyn, a 72-year-old retired librarian who came to me frustrated because she had given up driving at night. The glare from headlights overwhelmed her, and she no longer felt safe on the road. Her eye exam showed early signs of macular degeneration. Instead of rushing to medication, we started with her diet. She added half a cup of blueberries to her oatmeal most mornings and kept frozen berries in her freezer for snacks. 6 months later, she came back smiling. She still wore her glasses, but she was back to driving after dark without fear. The glare no longer crippled her, and she felt independent again. Blueberries weren't the only factor, but they helped give her retina the resilience it needed. I've seen similar results in many patients. A fisherman in his late 60s told me his eyes no longer felt as strained on the water once he swapped his afternoon chips for a cup of blueberries. Clinical studies mirror these stories. A 2019 trial published in Nutrients showed that older adults who ate 1 cup of blueberries daily for 90 days improved memory and executive brain function. Since the health of the eyes and brain are deeply connected, that's another powerful reason to make blueberries a daily habit. The good news is that adding them is simple. Fresh or frozen, a handful a day is enough to deliver protection. Eat them plain, with yogurt, or mixed into salads, but skip the muffins and sugary jams that drown out the benefits with refined sugar. For anyone over 60 who wants to keep their vision sharp, blueberries are one of the easiest and most delicious tools nature has to offer. Fruit number 4, oranges, the vitamin C powerhouse. If blueberries are the shield against oxidative stress, oranges are the builders and repairmen that keep your eyes strong. This fruit, so familiar from childhood breakfasts and lunchboxes, is one of the richest natural sources of vitamin C, and for people over 60, that makes it a quiet powerhouse for vision. Cataracts are one of the most common problems in older adults, clouding the lens of the eye and affecting more than 24 million Americans over 60. Vitamin C slows this process by protecting the proteins in the lens from oxidative damage. A long-term study published in Ophthalmology followed more than 1,000 women for 10 years and found that those with the highest vitamin C intake were a full third less likely to develop cataracts. That's not a small difference. That's life-changing protection. Vitamin C also supports collagen, which gives structure to the cornea and sclera. Without enough of it, the cornea can weaken and lose clarity. At the same time, vitamin C strengthens the tiny capillaries of the retina, keeping them flexible and reducing the risk of leaks that are so common in conditions like diabetic retinopathy. In my own practice, I've seen patients benefit simply by adding oranges to their daily diet. George, a 68-year-old retired mechanic, loved working on old engines but complained that his manuals looked foggy and unreadable. Tests showed early cataracts. Instead of just waiting for surgery, we made some changes. He began eating an orange every morning, traded his candy bar for sliced orange in the afternoon, and even added fresh orange juice to his water. 18 months later, his cataracts hadn't disappeared, but they hadn't worsened either. His vision was stable, and he told me proudly, "Doc, I'm not ready for surgery yet, and I don't feel like I'm slipping backward." Oranges aren't the only citrus worth mentioning. Grapefruits, lemons, mandarins, and clementines all bring similar benefits, and variety makes the habit easier to maintain. Science continues to confirm what I've seen in the clinic. Researchers at King's College London followed 1,000 pairs of twins for a decade and found that women who consumed more vitamin C-rich foods had a 20% lower risk of developing cataracts. And the landmark ARDS-2 study showed that antioxidants like vitamin C, when combined with other nutrients, reduced the risk of advanced macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of blindness in seniors. Adding oranges to your life doesn't have to be complicated. Eat the whole fruit whenever you can instead of relying on packaged juice, which is often packed with sugar. One medium orange delivers about 70 milligrams of vitamin C, nearly your entire daily requirement. Pair it with leafy greens like spinach to help your body absorb iron more efficiently while also boosting macular health. Keep your orange earlier in the day rather than late at night, since juice before bed can spike blood sugar and interfere with sleep. One of my favorite recommendations is a simple spinach, orange, and walnut salad. The spinach adds lutein, the orange brings vitamin C, and the walnuts supply omega-3s. Together they support not only your eyes but also your heart and brain. When you think about protecting your eyesight, it's easy to picture glasses, eye drops, or surgery. But sometimes the most powerful tool is sitting right in your fruit bowl. An orange a day isn't just a refreshing snack. It's a daily investment in clearer, stronger eyes and steadier vision for the years ahead. Fruit number 3, kiwis, the lutein and zeaxanthin boost. If oranges are the vitamin C powerhouses, kiwis are the hidden champions of eye pigments. They are especially rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, nutrients often called the sunglasses for your eyes because they filter harmful blue light, neutralize free radicals, and keep your vision sharp. At the center of your retina is the macula, the small but vital area responsible for central vision. It is what you rely on when you read, recognize faces, or drive. Over time, the macula becomes vulnerable to blue light from screens, oxidative stress, and circulation problems, and this damage eventually shows up as age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in older adults. Lutein and zeaxanthin serve as natural protectors by absorbing blue light, reducing oxidative stress, and improving visual sharpness so that colors appear brighter and details remain clear. Since the body cannot produce these pigments on its own, they must come from food, and kiwis are one of the richest yet most underrated sources. The science is clear. A large study published in the Archives of Ophthalmology followed more than 100,000 people and found that those who consumed the most lutein and zeaxanthin had a 43% lower risk of macular degeneration compared with those who consumed the least. Researchers at the University of Oslo reported that eating just 3 kiwis per day reduced oxidative DNA damage by nearly 30% in older adults, a strong indicator of their antioxidant power. Another review in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that people with higher lutein intake performed better in glare conditions, meaning they were less likely to struggle with squinting when driving at night or walking in bright sunlight. I remember Maria, a 70-year-old retired art teacher who came to me upset because colors no longer looked the same. "Doctor, they seem dull and washed out," she told me. Tests revealed early macular degeneration. Instead of relying only on supplements, I encouraged her to add more lutein-rich foods, including kiwis. She began eating 1 kiwi with breakfast and another with her evening tea. 6 months later, she returned with a smile, saying that while her eyes were not perfect, the colors looked alive again, and she had painted her first canvas in over a year. Another patient, Dennis, 65, worked long hours at a computer and complained of gritty, tired eyes. He swapped his afternoon cookie for a kiwi and a few almonds, and within weeks he noticed his eyes felt less strained, allowing him to work longer without discomfort. These are simple but powerful examples of nutrition working exactly as it should. Kiwis also bring more to the table than just lutein and zeaxanthin. They provide more vitamin C per gram than oranges, significant amounts of vitamin E, and copper, which supports proper nerve signaling in the eyes. Eating 1 or 2 kiwis per day is enough to provide meaningful protection. I often recommend washing them well and eating them with the skin on, since the skin adds extra fiber and antioxidants. Golden kiwis, with their sweeter yellow flesh, offer even higher vitamin C levels and are a good option for those who dislike the tartness of the green variety. So let me ask you, if something as simple as adding a kiwi to your breakfast could help you see colors more vividly, adapt better to glare, and slow the decline of your macula, why not make it a daily habit? We often overlook these small, practical choices, but in truth, they can do as much for your long-term vision as any prescription. Kiwis may not look like a miracle food, but for your eyes, they are a quiet force of protection, a daily gift from nature that acts like a built-in pair of sunglasses. Fruit number 2, grapes, the resveratrol protector. When most people think of grapes, they picture a glass of wine, a childhood snack, or maybe a bunch packed into a lunchbox. But grapes are far more than a sweet treat. To your eyes, they are circulation boosters and retinal protectors, thanks to a powerful compound found in their skins called resveratrol. This polyphenol has been studied for decades for heart health, but research now shows it plays an equally important role in protecting vision, especially as we age. Resveratrol shields the delicate light-sensing cells in the retina from oxidative stress and ultraviolet damage. It also improves circulation by relaxing blood vessels and reducing cholesterol buildup, ensuring that oxygen and nutrients keep flowing to the fragile capillaries of the eye. And because chronic low-grade inflammation drives age-related macular degeneration, resveratrol's natural anti-inflammatory properties offer critical protection. The evidence is strong. A study in molecular vision demonstrated that resveratrol protected retinal cells from oxidative damage, while researchers at the University of Miami found that grape-rich diets lowered retinal inflammation markers by as much as 40% in older adults. A clinical trial published in the Journal of Nutrition reported that participants who ate grapes daily for 16 weeks showed measurable improvements in retinal function. Animal research adds to the picture, showing reductions of up to 30% in retinal oxidative stress. Put simply, grapes are not just food for the table, they are medicine for the eyes. I think of Harold, a 74-year-old retired teacher with type 2 diabetes, who came to me worried about his eyesight after being told he had early diabetic retinopathy. "Doctor, I'm afraid of going blind," he confessed. We worked on stabilizing his blood sugar, encouraged more leafy greens, and made one simple swap. He replaced his afternoon cookies with a handful of red grapes. 6 months later, his eye exam showed stable blood vessels, his vision hadn't worsened, and he told me with relief, "Doc, I traded wine for grapes, and I can still enjoy my crossword puzzles." Grapes weren't a cure, but they gave his eyes a fighting chance. I also recall Ruth, a 70-year-old grandmother who struggled with dryness and occasional blurriness. She admitted she rarely drank water and snacked on salty foods. By replacing some of those snacks with grapes, which are naturally hydrating and packed with antioxidants, she noticed her eyes felt less strained, especially in the evenings. Beyond resveratrol, grapes contain quercetin and catechins, antioxidants that add another layer of defense for the retina. They are high in water, helping to keep eyes hydrated, and they provide vitamin K, which supports healthy blood vessels. The practical advice is simple. 1 to 2 handfuls of grapes a day, especially red, black, or purple varieties, can make a real difference. The skin is where most of the resveratrol is concentrated, so eat them whole. And for those looking for a healthy alternative to ice cream or candy, frozen grapes are a refreshing option. The numbers speak clearly. Seniors who ate grapes regularly scored better on visual field tests than those who didn't. Small human studies have shown that resveratrol supplements can improve retinal blood flow in as little as 6 weeks. And with so much overlap between vascular health and eye health, it makes sense. What benefits the heart also benefits the eyes. So let me ask you, if something as small and enjoyable as a handful of grapes each day could strengthen your circulation, calm inflammation, and protect your retina, isn't that worth making a habit? Grapes may seem ordinary, but for your eyes they are quiet, steady protectors, helping slow the damage of aging and keeping your vision clearer for longer. Fruit number 1, papaya, the underrated vision fruit. When people think about food for their eyes, carrots usually come first, but papaya may actually be the stronger ally. Sweet, tropical, and too often overlooked, papaya is packed with vitamin A, beta-carotene, lutein, and zeaxanthin, a rare combination that makes it one of the most complete fruits for vision health. Vitamin A is essential for seeing in low light, and even mild deficiency can make it harder to adjust in the dark. Papaya provides a natural, safe supply that helps prevent night blindness. Its beta-carotene is converted into vitamin as the body needs it, easing oxidative stress in the retina without overwhelming the system. Lutein and zeaxanthin, the same pigments that make kiwis so valuable, filter harmful blue light and shield the macula, lowering the risk of macular degeneration. Research consistently supports these benefits. A 2018 study in the British Journal of Nutrition found that diets rich in carotenoid-heavy fruits like papaya reduced the risk of macular degeneration by up to 30%. Studies from India have shown that seniors who eat papaya regularly have much lower rates of night blindness. Other work has highlighted papaya's unique enzyme, papain, which reduces systemic inflammation and indirectly protects the fragile blood vessels that feed the retina. Population studies confirm the same story. Where papaya is eaten often, rates of age-related vision decline are lower. Linda, a 69-year-old retired nurse, once told me, "Doctor, I can't drive at night anymore. The road signs vanish as soon as the sun goes down." She wasn't diabetic, her pressure was normal, but her vitamin levels were low. Instead of sending her home with a bottle of supplements, I suggested she eat half a papaya with breakfast 3 times a week and pair it with leafy greens. 4 months later, she came back smiling. I still prefer daylight driving, she admitted, but I'm not terrified of short night trips anymore. I can read the road signs again. Papaya didn't cure her vision, but it gave her body what it needed to function better. I've seen similar results in others. Paul, a 72-year-old gardener, blended papaya into smoothies with lime juice in the evenings. Within weeks, he noticed better adaptation to twilight, saying he could stay in the yard until sundown without his eyes giving up. Papaya's strength is not limited to vitamin and carotenoids. One medium fruit provides more than a full day's supply of vitamin C, which supports collagen and blood vessel health. It also delivers vitamin E to protect eye cell membranes, along with folate and potassium, which keep circulation steady. This makes papaya not just an eye fruit, but a whole-body support food. The practical advice is simple. Half a medium papaya 3 or 4 times a week is enough. Eat it fresh, scooped with a spoon or cubed into a fruit salad. Blend it into smoothies, and don't hesitate to squeeze lime on top to boost antioxidant absorption and flavor. For a real powerhouse bowl, pair it with blueberries or kiwis to combine multiple protective nutrients in one meal. If you've noticed that dim restaurants feel too dark, that headlights seem harsher than they used to, or that night driving makes you uneasy, papaya should be on your grocery list. One medium papaya gives you over 1,000 IU of vitamin A, more than enough to support daily needs. Diets high in carotenoids are linked to a 35% lower risk of macular degeneration progression, and seniors in tropical countries who eat papaya regularly consistently show better adaptation to low light. Papaya may not carry the reputation of carrots or blueberries, but it deserves its place at the top of the list. With its blend of vitamin A, carotenoids, lutein, and zeaxanthin, it prevents night blindness, protects the retina, and slows the decline of vision with age. For anyone over 60 who wants to keep the world sharp and bright, papaya isn't just a treat, it's a necessity. So let's bring it all together. You've just discovered the 5 fruits that can help keep your eyes sharp and clear after 60. Blueberries, the antioxidant shield. Oranges, the vitamin C powerhouse that slows cataracts. Kiwis, the natural sunglasses loaded with lutein and zeaxanthin. Grapes, the resveratrol protector that boosts circulation. And papaya, the most underrated fruit of them all, rich in vitamin and carotenoids to fight night blindness. Individually, each of these fruits brings something powerful to the table. But together, they form a natural defense system against the very forces that age your eyes: oxidative stress, inflammation, and poor circulation. Science supports it, and real people have lived it. These are not exotic, hard-to-find remedies. They're everyday foods that can give you back confidence, clarity, and independence. Now imagine this: reading the fine print without frustration, driving at night without fear, or simply seeing the faces you love in crisp, vivid detail. That's what protecting your vision can mean for your life. Thank you for watching. If this video inspired you, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who could use this knowledge, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next video. Your support keeps us going and helps us share this life-changing information with more people. Take care of your eyes, take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next video.